I'm glad to be with you all this evening, and I would like for you to join me in Ephesians chapter 6. Ephesians chapter 6. You know, as I noticed this morning, and it's the same for this evening, there are a lot of family members of the local spiritual family here who are visiting this weekend, and I imagine that has to do with certain school breaks and vacations and that sort of thing, or maybe it was just a coincidence for some. But certainly is good to see you, and I know that the ones that you're sitting next to on a pew are especially glad to see you, and certainly the church here, who has known you for maybe a longer time than I have, is glad to see you back as well. And something that I think that probably you who are visiting with your family, with your parents, with your grandparents, something that you're starting to maybe appreciate more than you ever have, and certainly you have in the past, but even more so now, is how special it is to be able to worship with your parents and your grandparents if that's possible. And that's something that as the years go by, that gets more sweeter and sweeter, more precious to you. And certainly for the rest of us who might think of those who have passed on, you think about those good memories and you think about how that makes you a better person as well. Just thinking about those memories of them. And, you know, when I think about some of my family, I think about those who have gone on, and that makes you better and makes you sit up a little bit straighter, so to speak, and give that little bit extra. And I would say as well, too, that among the blessings of being part of this congregation, and I haven't said this really so much before, but it really is a blessing that my folks are able to be here, and certainly my sister and brother-in-law, whom I love dearly, too. I imagine sometimes it's an odd experience for them hearing me speak, because they probably hear a lot of echoes, and that's probably a good thing. And probably even more so with the lesson that I want to consider with you this evening. You know, we just sang the song that Chase led us in, The Solid Rock. Among the many areas of our lives that we need some solid ground underneath us is in our homes. And I think we see that a lot in our country now, in our churches now. We need stronger homes. And one of the things that we want to talk about this evening has to do with the home. And what we want to do is look at one specific area of the home that God has given us some very clear teaching on. Look in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. Have you ever imagined the first time these letters were read to the churches? You've gotten the news. We have received a letter from the Apostle Paul. And maybe, does this even wait until the next Lord's Day? Or do we just go ahead and assemble and send out the runners throughout the city? Just convene everyone. We've got a letter from the Apostle Paul. And they knew Paul by face. He had stayed for over 3 years in Ephesus working and preaching. Many of them were baptized by or even at the teaching of Paul. And now we've gotten a letter from him. And now they're sitting there and they're hearing this read for the first time. What an exciting moment to have heard the blessings and the treasures of Christ in Ephesians for the first time. And then as he has come along in all of this, the reader says, children. And you can imagine the ears prick up at that. The children he's speaking of is not just the little ones, but it's if you are in the relationship by which you have a parent, you are a child. And so this lesson that we're going to consider this evening, honor your father and mother. This is not a lesson that's just to the little ones out there who can barely peek up over a pew. This applies to all of us who have that relationship. And I want to tell you something else as well. As we go through this lesson, I want to emphasize this. This is not one of those lessons where you say, oh, I hope the kids are listening. I hope the children are listening, because this is really for them. Yes, it's for them. When this was read, Paul expected that the little ones there at Ephesus would listen. And he gives very simple instructions when he addresses the children, if you'll notice in his letters. But he is also saying this to even adults who have parents. He's also saying this to the parents, which was something that we'll consider then this evening. Before we look further at this command to honor father and mother, I want us to take a moment and reflect on the fact that when God gave this command to children, He really means it. And I want us to think for a moment how serious God is about this by looking to something in the law of Moses. Now, I understand that what we're about to read is not what we are accountable to today in terms of the specifics. And if we were accountable to it today in the specifics, maybe some of us wouldn't be alive sitting in this room. But the principle applies. Let's go back to Deuteronomy chapter 21. Deuteronomy chapter 21. So here in the law, if you go on down to verse 18, the law says, Deuteronomy 21:18, if a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and who, when they have chastened him, will not heed them, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his city, to the gate of his city, and they shall say to the elders of his city, the son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death with stones. So you shall put away the evil from among you, and all Israel shall hear and fear. Clearly here we're talking about older children, those who are in a position to be expected to work, to help start providing for the family, but who spend it on wasteful living. And what he mentions here, he just eats and he just drinks. He's lazy. The idea here is that yes, those specific things would be condemned in the child and the son, but this is representative in general of here is a child, a son, we can't do anything with him. He will not respect or honor us even enough to listen to the most basic of instructions. God says, execute him. The point we're trying to make with this is that no, we're not accountable to that. And there are reasons why, and if you don't understand why, that would be a great conversation to have afterwards. But the point that we're making is that in principle, this is how seriously God takes the relationship that children should honor father and mother. Before we look into more practical aspects of this, I want to think for a moment a little bit more deeply on some of the words and some of the ideas that he presents back in Ephesians 6:1 through 3. This word honor, well, what do we mean by that? Honor your father and your mother. Honor does not mean obey. We want to stress that. There can be obedience that does not mean that there is honor. I don't know that you can honor without obedience, but we can certainly obey without honor. Can I explain what I mean by that? Would you go please take out the trash? Would you go please take out the trash? One last time, would you go take out the trash? And you mutter some things under your breath as you go out. Now, we could argue that there might not be obedience there, but if we're talking about obedience in that, did you do what you were told to do? Not the first time, not the second time. Could you say, okay, maybe the third time there was obedience? All right, maybe, but is there honor at all in any of that interaction? Honor means a lot more than just obedience. What the honor that the Lord is talking about here is when I acknowledge the fact that my parents are worthy of my respect and of my love simply by virtue of the fact they are my parents. Because I acknowledge the fact that they deserve my respect, I will both behave and have attitudes that are aligned with that. That's what we're talking about honor here. Honor can be shown not just in the actions or the words or the speed with which I comply with their wishes, but it's the attitude with which I even think of my parents in my mind. So it's true that in body, visually, I can obey my parents, but inwardly, I'm dishonoring them. And that is a sin against God. When we think about ourselves as Christians, even though we might be young, even though we might be under our parents' roof, we can sin against God if we don't have the proper respect and honor toward our parents. Another point that I think we need to gain here and just set some common ground, and this means that there are no exceptions. You go back to Ephesians 6, and is it that God says, children, if your parents are Christians, you need to honor them, obey them in all things. If you like your parents and you think they're cool, or if your parents treat you well and you respect them, then you should honor them. None of that. He says, honor your father and your mother. And there is another principle that the Scripture expresses, and we won't turn there, but in 1 Peter chapter 2, he says that slaves are to be respectful and obedient to their masters, even the difficult and the harsh ones. And so when I think about relationship with parents, there are no exceptions. Even if the parents aren't worthy, even if they're not Christians, only so far as they say something or encourage you to do something that's breaking with God's will, accepting that, they are to be obeyed and they are to be honored. Another point that I think we need to make here is that there's not an age limit. Now, when he says, honor your father and your mother, now, if you're living under your parents' roof, certainly it applies to you. But what about now I've gotten off, I've married, I've cleaved to my wife, I've left father and mother, certainly that doesn't apply to me anymore. Well, I don't think many of us in here would take that kind of mindset, but even if someone were inclined, turn over to Matthew 15, and I'd like for you to think about something that Jesus says here. Matthew chapter 15. So this is one of the occasions when Jesus has a run-in with the Pharisees. And the Pharisees here were critiquing Jesus and his disciples for breaking the tradition of the elders. They don't wash their hands in a ritual, ceremonial way before they eat. And so Jesus then is going to turn this around and expose their hypocrisy and the fundamental issue of what's actually underlying their challenge. Look in Matthew 15 and verse 3. He answered and said to them, why do you also transgress the commandment of God because of your tradition? For God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death. But you say, whoever says to his father or mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is a gift to God, then he need not honor his father or mother. Thus you have made the commandment of God of no effect by your tradition. You see what the point he's making there? Here are the Pharisees, and they're going around, and someone says, well, look, I'm not able this week or this moment to provide for my aged father or mother because I've already allocated those funds as a dedication or a devotional gift to God. So sorry, Mom and Dad, I can't chip in at this moment. I've promised that to God. And so the Pharisees would say, oh, if that's something dedicated to God, then you got to do that, even if father and mother starve. And so Jesus is saying, you are hypocrites by taking your traditions and your interpretation of the law and unfolding that on top of what God has plainly said. Can you kind of read between the lines and at least understand that he here is expecting that part of honoring father and mother would be an adult who can provide for himself, giving to father or mother who might be in need. Clearly here speaking about adults. And so the command in Ephesians 6, too, to honor father and mother, that's said to every one of us in here who have a living father or mother. There's no age limit. Can I say one more thing about this before we get into a few more specific details? Honor father and mother means that they're responsibilities. And of course, they're responsibilities for the young person. And even a child who is old enough to even understand and follow some of what I'm going to say, there are some responsibilities. But certainly for you young people who are still under your parents' roof and they still provide for you, you're still in school, that's great. You're exactly in the place that you ought to be. but especially for those of you who are a little bit older, for those of you who are Christians and mindful of your role in God's plan and of God's family here, you have responsibilities. But I want to say something else about this. Parents, father and mother, you have responsibilities as well. When God gives this command to honor father and mother need to process that as, I have responsibilities in this area too. So that's what the rest of our lesson is talking about the responsibilities of both children and parents in this matter. And so from here on out, unless I qualify it, children means children. It doesn't matter if you are 15 or if you are 55. If you are a child and you have parents, that's what I'm referring to. So with that said, what are some responsibilities that come with honor? The way I want to think about it and the model I want to present is this as we proceed. I think of the realm of responsibilities and obeying this command in the family, in the home, is kind of like a scale or balances. On the one hand, we have the parents, and the other hand, we've got the child or the children. And when we think about honoring father and mother, in terms of responsibilities, if the responsibility is on one side or the other, that kind of weighs down. And so what we're going to talk about is there's actually a dynamic. There's a changing relationship in who has obligations in this matter. And so I want to kind of bring that out to the fore as we go through. So what about in infancy and in early childhood? This is the only time in which the parents have the heaviest weight of influence. If we were to think about our scales on honoring father and mother in early, infancy and early childhood, it's way down with the parents. You've got the responsibilities here. And whatever the children are as spiritual beings, as they are developing as such, a lot of that is what the parents are making them and forming them to be. And this time cannot be wasted. So, parents, teach your children to honor God, and thus you and the mother or the father as a result of that. Children first and foremost learn that I honor God, and they will learn to honor God by how they honor you as the earthly father, as the earthly parent. And even the youngest of children can begin to learn that mom and dad are obeyed, that they're listened to, because that makes God happy. And they're not yet clear on who God is. God to them is what the parents are teaching him to be, and what they're showing him by nature, by the trees and the sky and the animals and the other children. That's how they are learning who God is. So teach the children to honor God, and the parents then as a result. And something else I would say about this, children learn how to honor their parents by observing how the parents treat one another. If the child is viewing mom and dad, and the sum total of the interactions are sniping at one another, being short with one another, if dad comes home from work and he is just in a royally foul mood, and he's short, and he maybe says rude things or angry things or slams a door in the face of mom, should we be surprised if the young boys and girls grow up struggling with this business of honoring father and mother? Parents, you have a responsibility here. They will learn how to honor you by how you honor your spouse. And so be aware of the tone, the expressions, the way you speak to one another. Your children are watching. Your children are listening. And whether they like it or not, or even choose it or not, early on, they are following your lead. Treat one another with respect, with love. Submit to one another. Love one another. Show affection and tenderness to one another. Don't just speak, show. And this is how children can learn to honor you as well. Can I also say a word to parents? And by the way, I'm saying this with all humility because I haven't tried my hand at it yet. But I can observe, all right? And I can, by observation, pick up a thing or two, hopefully. Parents, view your responsibility as earning the honor of the children. Can I say that again? You are earning and working to earn their honor. Now, of course, the honor should be there. And it should be yielded whether you've earned it or not. We've covered that, and there are times in which the child, it's not their business to say, now, have they earned it or not? Do they earn my respect? That's one thing. But there's also maybe a mindset of the parents of, I want to so treat the child and interact with them in a way that encourages them to honor me. Maybe I can phrase this another way. Maybe we should be aware as parents on not acting in such a way with our children, with shortness or with impatience or with selfishness, such that would discourage honor. Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, lest they be discouraged. Something also that one can observe and maybe can listen and learn from those who have been there and done it, that the discipline is a huge factor in the honor of father and mother. And I'm not going to sit here and tell those who have done so and raised wonderful, godly children specifics on how to discipline. Maybe that can come for another day, another year, another decade. But I can say this as a general observation. This is true not just with children. It's true with students. It's true with animals or pets, anything of the sort. The discipline has to be consistent, and it has to be reasoned. I think all of us can see at the grocery store, at the mall, on the ball field, a lot of parents seem, and I understand that there are things going on behind the scenes that I don't know of and don't understand, but I'm afraid a lot of times parents are more intent on controlling their children than they are training their children and instructing them. It's not just, I want to make the noise go away. I want to make the rowdy behavior go away. I want to stop that so I get some peace and quiet. Or is it, will I say and so act, or sometimes punish in such a way that's not controlling behavior, controlling my environment? Or is it, I want to train this soul to start to learn how they can train and discipline themselves. And that then, with love, honor will come as a natural result of that. And something else about this honor that the children will come to learn in infancy and early childhood is that honor involves love and affection. This is true as a law of nature, I think. In order to be loved, one must love. I think the only one that's true about in this universe of ours is God. But in order for us to truly be loved, there must be love shown. Can I say something about as the children grow older, in early and in mid-teens? At this point, we've got in early childhood the responsibility so much on how the children honor father and mother. A lot of that really ultimately falls in the lap of mom and dad. But as they get a little bit older, certainly that scale really starts to change, doesn't it? And by the time we get to, early and mid-teenage, the balance, it seems to me, begins to shift to the child. And if the young person is getting to the point where you're in upper junior high or you're getting into high school, this is not the time to start learning how to honor father and mother. At this point, the parents, they can restrain and they can maybe say some words of guidance, but that becomes really difficult to form character at that point. Can I use an illustration for that? You go out in your yard or in a field and you plant a tree, a young sapling. You might go back sometime and you see maybe some wind or some kind of animal or something has kind of bent it over. You know what you can do with that sapling? You can stake it off, tie it up, direct the branches, and it will do it. It will be pliable. It will respond to that. But you come back after some time, and as time goes by, you are losing by every second. You're losing the opportunity to impact the growth and the trajectory of that tree. And we're all the same way as we grow up. Moment by moment, the very moments your heart is beating, you're losing the impact and the influence, the weight of influence on your children. That's God's plan. We grow. We become our own accountable beings. But we have to understand that reality. Young person of this age that can listen to me and understand this now, if you are in early or mid-teenage, or you're just beginning high school, you know this just as well, if not better than I do, The trend in society and in the world around you, among your peers, is just the expectation that you'll be a little rebellious. And in fact, even a little rebellious is actually kind of cool. The godly young man or woman will seek to follow God's lead. One of the greatest moments of your life, young person, is when you realize that it's not my job or my ambition in life to be cool to other people and to make other people like me. That I will be the best person I can be, and everything else will just fall into place. That is a wonderful day, and it feels really good when you can come to that point. You are following God's lead and what God has said. And there will be times in which, in your response to honoring father and mother, and you're honoring the wishes and the requests and sometimes the instructions of your parents, your peers, classmates, and others will deem you to be very uncool, very unwith it. I want to say something about this. This is a test of your devotion to God. You know, we kind of look at some of the young people of the Bible. We look at the Daniels and the Josephs and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Esther, and we look at them and we think, wow, under great duress and pressure, they stood up and they made the right decision, but I'm not in that kind of position. I'm never asked to do that same kind of thing. Well, no, not specifically. But could it be that sometimes our own fiery furnace, even in our youth, could be just such a simple matter as, I'm not going to follow the crowd of those who are immature and don't know life yet. I'm going to follow the request and honor father and mother in whatever capacity that may be. That may be an early test of your discipleship. Young person, about these matters, you don't always agree with your parents. You don't have to agree with your parents. Did Paul say in Ephesians 6, children, agree with your parents in all things? No. He did say obey. He did say honor. You're coming to have a mind of your own, and it's a powerful mind, and you can do wonderful things, and you are being trained by your parents to be a wonderful person, to be a strong person, but you must still obey and honor them. So as part of that, be aware of your tone. There can be the response of a yes, sir, or a no, sir, or a yes, ma'am, or I will, and it can be done in a very disrespectful way. Just because I say the right words doesn't mean that I've honored father and mother. And be aware of attitude in general. Let's not think things in our head to our parents or about our parents, or mutter things behind closed doors, or run our mouth off to friends about how annoying or how difficult our parents are when they're not around. That does not honor father and mother. That dishonors them. And I need to think about that. And if I have been in that position as a young person, won't you pray about it? Ask God to help you with that. Ask God that He would help you control your temper, the tone, the respect that you have for your parents. And it may be the case that there need to be some conversations and to tell your parents that you want them to forgive you and to help you and to work with you, and that you're trying to work on that. And if that happens, that's a good thing. And that's something that's not a sign of weakness. That would be a sign of maturity, that you're trying to please God and honor father and mother because of that. You know, on this point, it's not just in their presence, but it's so often that when we're absent from father and mother, that we can show honor or dishonor. In the groups, in the entertainment, in the other activities that you do away from home, away from your parents, or in the privacy of your room, would my parents condone this? If they knew I was saying that, or doing that, or watching that, or with these people, would they approve of that? Would that make them happy or not? And if I go on anyway and do what I know would displease my parents, I have dishonored them. And I need to pray for forgiveness about that. Look, about these things, young person, sometimes I know it's easy to think that, my parents wake up and their sole purpose in the day is to ruin my day and to be restrictive and just be difficult, because that's just part of the hurdles of being a young person. They got to make life difficult for me. That's not what they're trying to do. They don't say things and ask you to do things or say, here are some boundaries. They don't do it for their health. They don't do it beyond what you think. They don't do it because it's fun watching you, writhe and be uncomfortable or put out. They're trying to protect you, and they're trying to help you grow. And so let them do it. The young person that can have a coach on the ball field yell in their face will listen to them and will do it because they want to be a better ball player. And they want to play and not sit on the bench. Your parents are just trying to coach you up. They want you to be a better person than they are. And they're trying to help you. Be coachable. Listen to them. You may not agree. That's fine. Someday you may agree with them. Someday you may never agree with them about that one matter. It doesn't matter. Listen to them. Be coachable. And when you get out on your own, and if you still disagree, that's your business. You're under their roof. Honor them and obey. Parents, now's not the time to let go. Be there for advice and strength when mistakes are made. And it can be the case that the young person, even in their mid to late teen years, sometimes they can make decisions and do some things that are catastrophic. And so many times, even the ones of just moral failure, so many times, the sun rises the next day and there's a life to live. There's a journey to continue. And your reaction to that can make a tremendous difference. We're not saying pat them on the head and ignore sin. We're not saying anything of that sort. Be there for them. Help them pick themselves up and say, do you understand what happened? Why this happened? What led to it? Let's work together. Let's keep that from happening again. You still got a lot of road ahead of you. And there's still some changes you can make. You can grow. You can overcome this. This need not define you. And I want to tell you, if parents, you can be there for your children in those very dark times, those difficult times for them, that will only enhance their ability to honor you and to respect you. Young adult, this would apply, yes, certainly you've moved out of the house. You're on your own. It might also be the case that, as so happens, especially now, recently in recent times, a young person might get out of high school and they just get a job and they are able to stay at home with mother and father. Or you finish college and even you've started to kind of get a job and you're starting to get on your feet and your parents have said, look, you're welcome to stay here for a time, get your feet under you. And what that comes down to is that can be a very good and smart business decision. There's nothing wrong with that, okay? And so if you're in that kind of category, or if you are just out and about on your own, the way of honoring father and mother, if this is parents and this is children, is very much in your hands, young person, what you're going to do about this. You are at the point where even if your parents have been wretched to you, and mistreated you, God didn't say honor your father and mother just as long as they didn't verbally or physically abuse you or, No, he said honor your father and your mother. At this point in your life, it doesn't matter who they are, what they've done, how much you might resent things that they have done to you. You have it 100% within your control, even despite that, to honor them. And so, yes, parents, you still have a role in encouraging that honor and in a sense, earning it, so to speak. But the responsibility is entirely on the child now. At this stage, there are many wonderful ways that show honor to father and mother. And I know I'm talking to a lot of what we would call the adult children out here. This is a lot of us in here. One of the joyous moments of a young man or a young woman's life is when you realize that father is not just father. He's my friend. But it's not necessarily an equal friendship, because you start to realize I get much more out of this friendship than he gets out of it, so to speak, in terms of advice and experience and those things that can be shared. But it's a wonderful day when it's not just father, but my father can be a friend. This is an example of the kind of fulfilling, wonderful relationships that parents and children can share with children who are now adults, and especially for those who are also brothers and sisters in Christ. And if you're younger, so live and so work that you can have that kind of relationship with your parents. And I know that not all of us grow up in homes where God is honored. There are still some wonderful things to be shared when one becomes an adult and can have a new kind of relationship with parents. For the young person, especially if you're earlier on in this stage and you've just moved out of the house and you're really on your own now, already and in this moment, some of the most important decisions of your life are being made. What my career will be, what my trade will be, what I'll do for a living, where I will live, whom I will marry, what kind of person it is that I will marry. So many important decisions are made now. You don't have to obey your parents in these things. You're gone now. And especially for those who are married, you formed your own family unit. God does not tell adult children in this kind of context that you have to obey. But can I say something about that? Honor still means honor. There's a sense in which we phase out of you must obey your parents in all things. That has a moment in life. The honor father and mother knows no bounds. Respect your parents and be smart by discussing some of these decisions with them. I have a hard time seeing how it honors father and mother if I inform them, hey, I'm engaged now, surprise. Can we maybe bring the guy over and let you meet him, or the girl over? That I have a hard time seeing honor in that. Now, am I saying that this is a sin? Or no, I'm saying that we need to think about how the expectations and the respect for parents might be in this. There are important decisions. Discuss it with them. They've seen a thing or two. They've made good decisions. They've made bad decisions. Learn from their experience. Do we have to invent the wheel every time? Parents, you can still earn the respect of the children by acknowledging their independence and trusting that you have brought them up the best you could. And trust in their upbringing. Children, you who are now adults in your own right, again, you're not obligated to comply with your parents' wishes, but honor demands that you'll still listen, and at least take it into account. And it may be at the end of the day you say, I'm not going to do that. In my best judgment, or even in my preference, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to do this other thing. This is fine. And the relationship is still wonderful. A last category, those with elderly parents. Let's go over to 1 Timothy chapter 5. First Timothy chapter 5. There's something that Paul says in this letter to Timothy about how he is to teach the brethren to conduct themselves in the church. And again, the specific, sure, it's important. There's a principle also that underlies it. Look in 1 Timothy 5 and verse 3. Honor widows who are really widows. Now, real quick, hold on, just to understand the rest of the context, what he means by that. When is a widow not a widow? Well, what he is doing is he is saying, yes, we understand about widowhood, but there are some widows that will be taken in and provided for especially and specifically out of the church's communal treasury. And he is saying, if you are going to do that, here are requirements for what that widow must be like. That's the real widow that Paul is referring to here. But on the other hand, look in verse 4. But if any widow has children or grandchildren, Let them first learn to show piety at home and to repay their parents, for this is good and acceptable before God. Observation number 1, Paul never said honor your grandmother and your grandfather, so there you go. Think about that for a minute, especially after thinking about this verse. That's point number 1. But the second one is this idea of repay their parents. Can I ever repay my parents? I don't want to know the bill, okay? From youth up, I don't want to know. I don't want to be given that bill. The emotional support, the teaching, the rent and board, all of this. No, I don't repay father and mother. What does Paul mean here? It is this: child or grandchild. Your parent, your grandparents, by virtue of the fact of who they are, especially if they have brought you up with love and in the nurture of the Lord, they have a call on some of your resources and your time, your interest, your protection, your attention, and providing for them. So, some practical words on that. Young person, and even as you begin to be older in life, maintain the relationship with parents. Again, I'm not drawing lines of this is sin and this is not. I don't think that's the right way to look at it, but I would like for us to think about whether it is honoring to just kind of get busy with life and I just ignore parents or grandparents. Never check in, never look in after them, never ask, never let them into my life. I think that can get into the territory of some dishonor. Keep them in the loop, especially the grandparents and the lives of their grandchildren. That's a special gift that you can give to your parents for something for them to enjoy. And it's something that they've earned it. It dishonors parents to ignore them, to fail to see to their needs. And something that I think we all understand, especially in a day of time of government welfare and these other things. And that's fine if that's what our society wants to do. But if we're not careful, we can let government do what Paul told us to do here. And that's not right. We need to think about that. And it may be that, okay, they themselves have paid into this, and yep, that's kind of what they've earned, and that's coming back to them, and that's great. That's fine. That's the way our society has decided to set things up. There are more needs than just finances. There are more needs than just paying the bills and this sort of thing. Human beings, yes, we need to have money to provide for shelter and food and clothing and these sorts of things and privacy. But we have other needs like warmth and love and time. It won't do for a child of God to make sure that father and mother have their health care bills paid, but they are dying from loneliness. And yes, we have lives, jobs, things going on, and we're not saying just throw all of that to the wind and think about where our time, where our attention is going, and honor father and mother. And especially if it gets to the situation in which it's no longer honoring father and mother, maybe it's just father that's around to honor, or maybe it's just mother who is around. Their life has changed in ways that you may not understand yet. Be there for them, and do not forget them in that so difficult time. Something else, especially for those who are a little bit still earlier on in this kind of thing of life, form good relationships with your siblings and your close relatives, because you need to be a team, being able to help father and mother. It may be that you're just living somewhere else and you're out of the area. You need to have a good relationship with maybe siblings who are there. And if maybe there aren't siblings there around, maybe there can be some discussions about where it is that we're living. And I've known of people who have relocated and moved across the country because my mom and dad need me, and we're going to be there for them. But form good relationships with your siblings. Sometimes that's hard. Sometimes they don't want to have a good relationship with you. And sometimes it's not, here we are adults and we're still good siblings and a good family. At least be an ally with them and do your part to take the high road and do what you can to provide the best for your parents who did the best for you. Parents, you still have a role to play. And it may not be even anyone here, but I'm looking out at the audience, and if the Lord blesses us all with time in some years, there will be some parents who are in a position to be receiving care from your children. You still impact the equation. Be grateful. Let people serve you. Do not make it difficult for those caring for you. I know it's hard. I can just observe that is extremely difficult. But when there are conversations about driving and driver's licenses and keys and living situations and sometimes healthcare decisions and these other things, let your children love you. And don't make it difficult for them to do what they have to do to show you that honor. And maybe we can look at it this way. And maybe I can try and decide that if I ever live that long, I can have this kind of mindset toward it. Because it's easier to decide this now than maybe later. That's the time to enjoy the harvest of a lot of years of sowing some good in my children and grandchildren and others. Enjoy the harvest. Let them care for you. Make it easy on them. Thank them for what they do. And even in the moments of humiliation or moments in which you feel like your dignity is not what it should be, they're trying their best. And thank the Lord that He's given you some good children who care for you. Can I look with you and close with a couple of passages? Go over with me to John chapter 8. You know, at the end of the day, we say all these things and we give these suggestions that we trust based on biblical principle and the experience and the examples of those who are godly who go on. Maybe the clearest, most simple way to drive all of this is looking to Him who is our example in all things, who honored His Father more than any of us ever can truly understand. In John 8 and verse 29, Jesus said, "And He who sent me is with me. The Father has not left me alone, for I always do those things that please Him." There came a point for Christ where it's not just, well, the Father's will demands it, so I'm going to leave heaven and I'm going to do this. What Jesus is expressing here is just the knowledge of my Father's wish and what pleases Him is what drives me. And maybe the best thing we could say about this whole honoring business is this: we're not waiting around for parents to say, "Thou shalt and thou shalt not." I am in the business of trying to please them, to make them happy, to make them proud of me. And that's what I'm doing all of this for. And we learn from our Master, Jesus Christ, in that matter. Let's close by looking over in Hebrews chapter 5. You know, as we say all these things, you know, there are relationships that are hard. Not always everyone acts as they should. Maybe sometimes there are adult children who don't treat their elderly parents as they should. Maybe there are elderly parents who don't treat their children as they should. We've got all these things in the picture that don't make this perfect. Life is not always perfect with perfect people. But there comes a point in which what will then drive me to be the person God wants me to be? I can control self. What can drive me even in those difficult moments? Hebrews 5 and verse 7, speaking of Jesus, who in the days of His flesh, when He had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries and tears to Him, who was able to save Him from death, and was heard because of His godly fear. Though He was a son, yet He learned obedience by the things which He suffered, and having been perfected, He became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey Him. What it comes down to it is this: the one who came to earth and who cried his eyes out in the garden praying to the Father and yet went through it anyway, was doing it for you. And he gives us his will. And he asks us to do the small thing of honoring father and mother. Why can I not do the small thing in order to thank him who gave me everything? That's what this all comes down to in the end. And I appreciate your attention. You're listening patiently with me. And whatever, conversations, advice, these kinds of things we might have afterwards, I welcome them. But for now, we want to end by issuing an encouragement and an invitation that if you have not become a Christian and you have not accepted the wonderful gift of sacrifice that Jesus, the Son of God, made for you, then we would call upon you this evening to obey that very will. That if you would come confessing your faith in him and your turn from sin and the old you, and you'll submit to him as your master, you the disciple, you can be immersed in water to be forgiven, to be his child. And we encourage you to make that known if that's your desire tonight, or if in any way that our prayers and our encouragement can mean something to you. We wish you'd make it known while we stand, while we sing together.